Welcome to Pickwick Monthly, everyone. I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach Museum and Library in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And my Pickwickian co-host for today is Kevin Quinn. Hi, Kevin.
Hello, Ed. Good morning
Good to
or
see you.
afternoon.
Yeah, good to see you. Kevin and I, and other co-hosts for 20 months, are talking about Charles Dickens's The Posthumous Papers of the Pickwick Club, as it was first serialized in monthly parts from March 1836 to October 1837. Once a month, myself and one of a rotating set of co-hosts talk about each serialized part. Along the way, I'll share some of the items in the Rosenbach's collections, including today, in which we have manuscript pages. The Rosenbach has many first editions, other manuscripts of Dickens, earliest surviving literary manuscript of Dickens, a lock of his hair, all things I'll be sharing in the coming months. In today's episode, we are going to cover number 13. We are going to cover chapters 35 to 37, when the Pickwickians go to the city of Bath. Maybe we should say it that way the entire show today. Bath.
But
And have some escapades. It's almost Kev, it's almost like a burlesque of a Jane Austen novel, I feel like, as I'm reading it. Uh,
so like the two Jane Austen novels, I believe that are set in Bath or Persuasion and Northanger Abbey, neither of which I've read. So there's still
oh, I have
worlds
very
left to
little to
go.
mention about them, yeah, but
Okay, a lot more to discover. So, but I know she's a big name in Bath with a
yes,
Jane
certainly
Austen
is.
Welcome Center at #1 Royal Crescent, and a whole lot going on. Boy, they sure come out, those Janeites.
And Dickens has a connection there too, with not only this, but at some point he visited there later. He used to visit someone there. I'm trying to remember who. Someone he knew there and used to visit. There was even a plaque at some place that Dickens was at, and he was also in Bath briefly, which I'll mention today before he actually wrote Pickwick, and that'll tie into what we're going to do today. But the Rosenbach has 22 manuscript leaves of half, which is about half of chapter 35, as we're going to do today, or chapter 34 that was originally published in the serial. And if you're reading the serial PDFs, it's chapters 34, 35, and 36 today. But in the most modern editions have adjusted that number to 37 to 39. But in this manuscript that I'll share today, it's part of the Prince Bladud story. Bladud. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce that extra, D there. And also Winkle getting locked out in the cold. So it's that whole end of that chapter. Next month, I'll just preview this too. Next month, we have even more manuscript. We have 5 more leaves from chapter 39. Yeah, today's 37, 30, 35, 36, and 37. I can't get these numbers straight. Next week is 38, 39, and 40, and we have some of 39. So there you go. And it's just 5 leaves of it. But we're not going to hit the manuscript until we get to the manuscript, because there's a lot to hit. Oh my gosh, my notes are 20 pages long today, Kevin.
Wow, you did a lot of prep. Ed. You got people. I got one page here, so
So we've got to get through this. I over prepare, right? So
that's good. I'm light today, so you can carry the load.
well, some of my notes are literally my opening and closing and those kinds of things too. So they take up space. Alrighty. Chapter 35. It begins. The trial is over. The Bardell v. Pickwick trial from last week, or from last month, is over. And this chapter is in which Mr. Pickwick thinks he had better go to Bath and goes accordingly. Almost like, I don't know, what's this chapter about, Dickens? He's just going to go to Bath. Like, no creative long thing. He's just going to go to bed. That's the chapter's title. Um, Parker is Pickwick's lawyer. He's just lost this case to Mrs. Bardell. 750 pounds damages he has to pay. And it is, which is, it's funny, as much as Dickens portrays a trial and the way it would go on from his time, and his he does it correctly the way the trial happens, but it is satirical, of course. And part of the satire here is, I mean, 750 is pretty high. As the research I've done in breach of promise cases, this case probably would have come in, like if they had found for Mrs. Bardell, they would have given her 150 pounds, and that would have been that. There was no extenuating circumstances. She's not pregnant. Her reputation hasn't been ruined, those kinds of things. But juries did like to find in favor of women who were suing for this. They like to say to men, it really seems across the board. They like to say to men, especially men with money, like, you shouldn't have been fooling around. And they find for the women, or sometimes if they really don't think it's his fault, they'll find for the woman anyway, and then give her a pound in damages. And then, he'll have to pay the court costs, because, nobody was going to stick some poor woman with court costs. It seems the juries really were like that. They were very sympathetic. But in this case, poor old Mr. Pickwick is found 750 pounds, and he's not going to pay.
If there was just an alibi, Ed,
I know, if he only had an alibi.
Alibi. I mean, Dickens comes back to this breach of promise thing once again in Little Dorrit, and it's great comic fun there too, where Casby's landlord's daughter also did a breach of promise, and I forget if I was better prepared like you, Ed. I remember the amount of the award. I think he does mention it, but Casby says, you know what, it just won't do to try it again. When he's interfacing with her. It's very comical too.
This chapter starts right away. Not one halfpenny, said Mr. Pickwick firmly, not one halfpenny. And then we get our first Wellerism. Why don't you read it?
Hurrah for the principal, as the moneylender said when he wouldn't renew the bill, observed Mr. Weller, who was clearing away the breakfast things.
Hooray for the principal, as the moneylender said when he wouldn't renew the bill. I love that principal pun there. That's perfectly, and a great example, like, for this character, Sam, as much as he's constantly talking about, and we'll skip this later today too, like, he doesn't seem to understand words. He understands words.
Oh, yes.
Oh,
yes. And he's already said Pickwick and principal once earlier in the book, sort of another riff on the meaning of principal here.
Well, I like the little exchange after this, like Sam's, mouthing off, as servants aren't supposed to do, right? Sam said, Mr. Pickwick, have the goodness to step downstairs. Certainly, sir. And he does. This little back and forth between them where, Pickwick just very, very, very gently reminds Sam, you're not supposed to be talking right now. And Sam just like, yes, sir, and goes away. So, it's just this way that I think Pickwick gently controls Sam, or it's not that, it's this way that Sam lets Pickwick gently control him, because you're not really controlling Sam. Pickwick says, doesn't matter. He's if they are vile enough to arrest me for the debt, then I will with perfect cheerfulness give myself up. But Parker tells him, well, they will. but for now, we don't have to worry. It's not going to happen until the next term. The next terms that the courts meet. So you've got like 2 or 3 months, right? Is that what it is?
Yeah, you said the 2 months to the next. And remember, Sam said at the trial, quoting Mrs. Bardell and her friends, that Dodson and Fogg were so generous as to, what we would say today, take the case on contingency, right?
Mhm.
Only if they got an award would they charge Mrs. Bardell,
Yeah.
including the costs. Keep that in mind.
Yep. This is going to come back. So what are they going to do in the meantime? And where shall we go next? And Pickwick says, I say Bath. I think none of us have ever been there. Let's just go to Bath. This is
why Bath at this point? Ed, did you find any
no, and I think
Dickens' life that pointed him there?
no,
Or
nothing points there. It's literally he has been running this. I mean, he started this so episodically, like they're just going to go out and this happens, and that happens. And then he's starting to connect things. He's got the Mrs. Bardell through line. He's got a through line with Sam and his father and his marriage, and he's got a through line with Jingle that lasts for a bit. And he's starting to build this, and as he builds it out, one of the things we'll notice today is we get an interpolated tale, the Prince Bladud story. We haven't had one in like 6 issues because he doesn't need them. He's busy doing things. And so I think we've had this, I think for several issues now, he's had a plot going on that he keeps hitting. And now that he's kind of wrapped up one part of that plot, that still goes on, the Bardell Pickwick thing, it's just like, all right, where am I going this month? And let's face it, Dickens is busy writing Oliver Twist. So he's just begun Oliver Twist. He's wrote 2 parts of Oliver Twist. He's just got to come up with something in the last 2 weeks. I think it's Twist in the beginning and then Pickwick at the end of the month he writes, I think. But that's just a general, way that Dickens is writing. He's just writing all the time because he has to. And he's got to figure out what to do with them. And he just decides, well, we're just going to travel around some more. So he's got to pick a place. And I think it's just random. He picks Bath. Now, it's got a lot of potential. It's got a lot of potential because of the satiric potential for the pretensions of Bath. I mean, this kind of stuff has been, satirized before. And Dickens is going there. To my knowledge, we don't know if he ever read Jane Austen. And I don't think Austen is even famous enough at this point where it would be like, ooh, Jane Austen wrote about Bath in a couple novels. She's not that famous yet. She will become in another, couple decades, but she's not yet. That it would be like off the top of his head. But Bath is famous. I mean, everybody knows it, and and he's been there once, which I'll talk about a little later. Perker hopes that Mr. Pickwick will change his mind there, obviously, because he needs to change his mind because he doesn't want his client to go to jail. And they never mention here whether Pickwick pays Perker, but I'm assuming he does. So, because that would seem to be unjust, that I'm not going to pay my own lawyer for the work he's done. But they don't mention it. So I don't think Perker is worried about any of this because he's not going to get paid unless I'm wrong later and find out that was the case. But I don't remember that. So Sam at once goes to the White Horse Cellar to book passage on the coaches, and the White Horse Cellar, or Hatchett's White Horse Cellar, as a lot of people would have known it, did exist. It was in Piccadilly, and it was one of the most famous coaching inns of the time. And it was, I have a little bit, this is the Inns and Taverns of Pickwick, which is a really, really cool book by B.W. Matz. It was published in 1921. I've read from this before and pulled info about this. At least in 1921, this is the up-to-date, kind of catalog of all of the inns and and pubs mentioned and taverns mentioned in the book. Sometimes he's like, oh, and it still exists, and now you look up now, it's like, well, no, it doesn't. But for the White Horse Cellar, he says, in those flourishing days of its existence, it was the starting point of all the mails for the west of England and was a bustling center of activity. It was apparently one of the sights of London, for on fine evenings, those with leisure on their hands would gather to watch the departure of these coaches. The scene became more like a miniature fair, with itinerants selling oranges, pencils, sponges, and such like commodities to the passengers and the spectators. And we'll see a little bit of that in the text as we get to it. But first, I have some pictures here of it. And oops, not yet. Let's go here. Here we go. Here's one. This is a painting by James Pollard. You can see it in the background here, and all the coaches and all this bustling activity here. I'll zoom in here a little. You can see right here, Coffee House Hotel, Hatchett's, the new White Horse Cellar, and here's the White Horse up top here. But it looks pretty busy, looks pretty bustling. But this is a very, kind of nice painting. Like everything's clean and
no manure.
Yeah. Here's I like this one. I can't zoom too much because I didn't get a great resolution on it. This is a painting by Maggs, was his name? M-A-G-G-S. I love on the windows here, we get advertisements. Deward's Perth Whiskey. Deward's advertisements on the window. So what's interesting is it did start out as a coffee house, and then quickly went to selling booze as well. But this is the bustle that was with that Matt's mentioned in the inns and taverns here, that Dickens will mention too, with all the peddlers and vendors all out front and how busy it is. And I have one more picture, which is a Crookshank. So Tom, and this is for the White Horse Cellar, Piccadilly. I don't know what this advertisement is for. Oh, it's Tom and Logic bidding Jerry goodbye. So this is in that Tom and Jerry adventures. There were these comic adventures that had been written up, and where the phrase Tom and Jerry comes from, which were into cartoon animals. But Tom and Jerry were these comic characters from the late 18th, early 19th century, and on stage and in written accounts. And but this is here. You see it, Hatchett's behind here, the new White Horse Cellar, and the bustle up here. Now this was actually, Hatchett's had been operating since 1720. Actually, it was torn down, and a new one was built about mid-century. So Dickens would have been familiar with both of this one that had been portrayed by Crookshank and the other couple people, but also there was a newer one that Dickens knew too. So but in the text here we get this, Sam's got to get 2 places to be had inside and 3 to be had out. And if people don't quite know what that means you could travel inside the coach or outside the coach up on top. If you were, outside was also cheaper, outside seats. So if you sat up on the roof, it was cheaper, but you're in the weather. So if it's not a nice day, it's not that comfortable. And then we get all this description of all the bustle going on around, right? Newspaper sellers, orange vendors, and then the Jews with the 50 bladed penknives. Jewish peddlers were, all over London. I've got this quote here, Kevin, from a book called The Jews of Georgian England, 1714 to 1830 by Todd Endelman. And it talks about, it says, the stock of a Sephardi peddler, Jacob Hadida, whose box was stolen in 1824, it's not far from the time this novel set, consisted of shawls, handkerchiefs, dried rhubarb, penknives, pencils, thimbles, other small items, and a wide variety of spices, including nutmeg, cloves, ginger, and mace. The large number of spices in his stock were typical of Sephardi peddlers. Ashkenazi peddlers, on the other hand, tended to specialize in inexpensive jewelry, like cheap watches and things like that. But I like in his list here for this box that was stolen from his peddler, he did have penknives. And because I look at that and I'm thinking, like, were Jewish peddlers known for selling penknives? But at least there was one real account where that was part of his stock. So maybe Dickens knew of a Jewish peddler here that was selling penknives. And you've always got to be careful when you come across whenever Dickens uses the word Jew, that you've got to wonder, is he being anti-Semitic? Because he certainly was, and especially later in his texts, but in real life too. He believed those stereotypes, much to his discredit. But here it's literally a description of these peddlers would have been out there. They all head into the traveler's room in Hatchett's in the White Horse Cellar to await their fare. And why don't you read the opening couple sentences of that, Kevin? You have that the traveler's room at the White Horse Cellar?
The traveler's room at the White Horse Cellar is, of course, uncomfortable. It would be no traveler's room if it were not. Can you hear me okay, Ed?
Yeah.
I keep getting a message my sound is bad. So it is the right-hand parlor into which an aspiring kitchen fireplace appears to have walked, accompanied by a rebellious poker, tongs, and shovel. It is divided into boxes for the solitary confinement of travelers and is furnished with a clock, a looking glass, and a live waiter, which latter article is kept in a small kennel for washing glasses in a corner of the apartment.
I get the idea, Kevin, especially we know that Dickens would have spent a lot of time in these kinds of rooms, especially when he was, riding the circuit, covering the elections for the Chronicle, constantly being sent out to do these kinds of things. He's well familiar with these, travelers' rooms at the inns. And this one, Mr. Pickwick, they encounter a stern-eyed man of about 45, large black whiskers. Whiskers, remember everyone at the time. Whiskers, when they say whiskers, they almost always, now whiskers is kind of a general term. Whiskers, facial hair. But whiskers almost always meant just this, just the side stuff, there you go. Mutton chops is what
I love this illustration.
It's be called. That is, yeah.
Fabulous. A stern Dowling just kind of, his default setting is, I will not be taken advantage of.
very demanding traveler. He is one of those demanding travelers. Rather suspected somebody wanted to take advantage of him, but it wouldn't do. So that's his general, demeanor in life as he's bossing around the poor waiter here about his buttered toast. And as soon as Pickwick mentions that they're going to be on the coach, not inside, I'll be damned if you're going inside. Dude, I didn't say I was going inside. I didn't say anything about taking your seats up. Don't worry about it. But once he hears that that's not the case, he seems fine. He's, I'm sorry, and here's my card. But he's very abrupt. It's almost Jingle-like, except they're not fragments, right? Like Jingle does the fragments, they're never complete sentences. But this gentleman, they're just short sentences. I hope we shall. I know we shall. I like your looks. They please me. Gentlemen, your hands and names. Know me. So it's still that he's like the fierce Jingle.
Mm.
Um, and his wife, she's a fine woman. I am proud of her. I have reason. I hope you have reason to be proud of your wife, but it's just an odd way for him to. But and then he tells them how he won her, right? I won her through a rash vow. Thus I saw her. I loved her. I proposed. She refused me. You love another? Spare my blushes. I know him. You do. Very good. If he remains here, I'll skin him. Well, now he's got to skin him. That's what he says. So he because he said I'll skin him, then he has to tell the guy I'm going to skin you, and then that guy quickly skedaddles. He saw that the rules of the service were imperative. He fled. I married her. Here's the coach. That's her head. That's just, I mean,
Of course, she's got no agency yet. She's just got to marry whoever's fiercest.
yeah.
You know, that's the,
she's a rather pretty face in a bright blue bonnet, but I love his dialogue. It's just the slightest touch for the smallest. I mean, the character who's not going to be, significant in this novel. There are no small characters. I know that. But he's not going to play a big role in this book. And it's just another one of those little Dickensian touches that we get.
And I think at this point in his writing career, I mean, he's, language, language markers, class and stuff. He's really playing around with that. We're going to see that, throughout these chapters.
Yeah.
And it's great stuff. He's coming into his own as far as finding voices more and more for his characters.
Yeah. Well, as they're about to get into the carriage, Sam has to stop him. Wait a minute. Here's a rather rum go, sir. This here coach is playing some impertinence, imperence with us.
Imprints.
Because on the side in gilt letters of a goodly size was the magic name of Pickwick. Do you know why that Pickwick is on this coach, Kevin?
Well, there was an actual Moses Pickwick that ran coaches. So, like today, I guess you might say it could even be a product placement today. Like maybe Moses flipped him a $5 and said, put me in there. I don't think that's what happened. I think that he just saw it. But it's sort of this meta narrative moment where his imaginative universe and the real world is blending right here in the text.
It inspires even a Wellerism from Sam. He says, not content with writing up Pickwick, they puts Moses afore it, which I call at an insult to injury, as the parrot said, when they not only took him from his native land, but made him talk the English language afterwards. So that's a good Wellerism right there, right? Adding insult to injury, as the parrot said, when they not only took him from his native land, but made him talk the English language afterwards, which was the insult to the injury. So, or the injury to the insult, which, however you want to make it out. But yeah, Moses Pickwick was a coach service. It was originally it was his brother Eleazar and Moses had a coaching service that went from and they went from the White Horse Cellar, this location specifically, to Bath, this coaching line, and it had Moses Pickwick, and Dickens would have seen these Moses Pickwick coaches long before he was writing, Pickwick Papers. And there's a lot of people that think that that's where he gets the name from. That's the most famous Pickwick name he's ever seen. He must know it. It's hard for him to come up with the name Pickwick, and he does come up with Pickwick for it. Robert Seymour didn't come up with the name Pickwick. Dickens came up with the name Pickwick. That he had to have known that this was a name he was choosing, which was a little famous. So to bring them and it's a coaching novel, right, Kevin? Like there's coaching all over the place. So it's surprising it took him more than halfway through the book before you finally mentioned Moses Pickwick. I have an advertisement here too from
Mhm.
that carriage service that also mentions, well, when they're going to, in a moment, get to Bath, and when they do, where is it? Here it is. Here's an advertising flyer from the White Hart Inn of Bath, 1828. This is exactly where they're going. And you see down here, performed by E. Pickwick and Company. This is Eleazar, Eleazar. That was his brother's name. His brother retires shortly after this. His brother retires, I think, in the 1830s, and then Moses takes it over completely. So maybe the coaches used to say E. Pickwick and Company on them, and then when Moses takes it over entirely, it says Moses on them. But this is where the carriages would go. Here is London right here. You can see London, a 4 inside coach through Devizes, Newbury, and Reading every morning at 8 o'clock except Sunday to the Bolton, Ton, Fleet Street, Golden Cross, Charing Cross, and calls at Hatchett's New White Horse Cellar. So this is where they're starting, and it's going to the White Hart Inn of Bath and back. So you could take it back that way too. But look at all the places. I mean, this is a very successful, very lucrative business, this coaching business. Lots of different lines here going through.
That's great stuff. And of course,
What's the warning? There's a warning. There's a notice at the bottom. What does it say? The proprietors of the above coaches will not be answerable for any parcel or passenger's luggage, whether lost or damaged, above the value of £5, unless regularly booked and an insurance paid. I mean, those rules still exist, right? You can get insurance for your luggage. We're not responsible for it. You see those warnings still. So,
and you can get your black carriage and your black
and
horse for
horses
funerals
for
too,
funerals, they
Mr.
have that too.
Sowerberry.
Yeah. So there we go. All righty. So this is, just fortuitous that, what the characters have could ride, and Sam's going to mention it, but well, I'm sorry, it may seem fortuitous, but actually Dickens has to know this all along, and he's finally bringing it up, and you're right, it's this kind of meta moment that happens here.
And of course, we're at a moment now where all that is vanishing, right? When he's writing, it's all going away. The Great Western Railroad, I
Yeah.
think, had already opened,
Yeah.
and by the time, the next, I think of Dickens, I know we're on Pickwick, but when he writes in Dombey and Son, when Mr.
Yeah.
Dombey goes to the small town of Leamington, he takes the train,
Yeah.
and the train is a monster of death. Yeah,
I was
so it's
I
so
was
different.
I was reading recently, there was a bit of criticism at the time. I'll have to find where it is. Maybe I'll post on the Facebook group site. Where a critic at the time of Pickwick was like, and Dickens doesn't know. Dickens doesn't get this coaching stuff right. But of course he couldn't know it because, it's already in the past. And actually, other historians have answered say, no, I actually got it all right. And that he was still witnessing it. That these coachmen, these huge, big, burly coachmen, they were still around when Dickens was there. It was just he got to see, as an adult, he saw the tail end of it. But as a child, he completely saw it. So he really witnessed, the growing up. He witnessed the kind of height of the coaching industry, and then it just slowly going away over a couple of decades.
That part in David Copperfield with the dolphin and so on. Yeah, that's taken right from his life.
Yeah. Well, Sam is unfortunately depressed because he says he's not allowed to whoop anybody. Ain't nobody to be whooped for taking this here liberty, sir. And certainly not, replied Mr. Pickwick eagerly. Not on any account. Jump to your seat directly. So Sam's afraid that, boy, losing this trial must have broken his spirit if he's not going to let me whoop someone over this. Mr.
Pickwick in principle, he's
So, all righty. Well, now they're riding Pickwick and Winkle sitting inside with the Dowlers. and and converse with them the whole way. And up top are Snodgrass and Tupman and Sam. And they have to ride with all the smoker. I guess the smoking section was on top. Smoking section was everywhere, people, but here on top, there, the one guy is puffing away on his cigars the whole time. And oh, he's got a friend. Wait, what's did I bring himself and a friend also? Oh no, I passed over. I'm looking at the next part. I'm like, wait a minute, who's this charming young man? That's not till we get to Bath. But up on top, we have the one young gentleman in an India rubber cloak who smoked cigars all day. Another one who kept lighting them up and then throwing them away. So, but they finally arrive at the White Hart Hotel opposite the great pump room of Bath. And the White Hart Inn was not just the coaching line from the Pickwicks. It's actually the White Hart Inn was operated by Eleazar and Moses Pickwick. And this inn also features in Jane Austen's Persuasion. This is which you really should read. I mean, it's just,
I will. I still got some time left, so I got a shot.
Anne Elliot in this, when the Elliot family goes to Bath, and Anne Elliot visits friends there at the White Hart. And it's also, for those of you who have read Persuasion, the White Hart Inn is where Captain Wentworth writes the letter in the penultimate chapter of the novel. That's all I'll say. So one of the great climax, one of the greatest chapters, maybe my favorite chapter in all of Austen's books.
Oh, high praise.
Penultimate chapter of Persuasion that takes place in the White. Well, in that chapter, Anne goes to the White Hart Inn and Wentworth writes a letter to her. So absolutely great. Anyway, and before writing Pickwick, Dickens was in Bath once. In 1835. Maybe he was there another time, but not that we know of, and it's actually not likely. But he was definitely there in 1835. He covered a speech by Lord John Russell for the Morning Chronicle. It was just a political speech. He had to go and cover it. But and on that occasion, he didn't stay at the White Horse Hotel. He stayed at the Saracen's Head in Broad Street. There's no mention in Bath of the Saracen's Head. It's odd that he's taking his characters there, but he doesn't mention where he stayed himself, because Dickens does this all the time. But there is a different Saracen's Head later in the novel. So he does mention there. I have no idea how many pubs, inns are named Saracen's Head in England, but there are still almost 24 of them in the UK now. Written out. And I think there were probably way more than that in Dickens's time. Saracen's Head was a favorite name for pubs. They loved using that name, which would have been a bit gruesome too. And when Dickens went to Bath, it's interesting, Kev, most of his descriptions of this place you can match to an 1825, it's called the Improved Picture Guide to Bath. Almost everything he mentions about the city and some of the phrases are also in this guidebook to Bath. So you're thinking, well, if he went to Bath, why did he have to use the guidebook? Because when he went to Bath, he was traveling all night long, for the Chronicle to cover it, gets there, covers the speech, and then leaves. So
he's a commercial traveler.
There was no sightseeing. He didn't go visit the great pump room. He didn't do any of that stuff. He was in and out for the speech. And that's all. So, but he did use the 1825 Improved Picture Guide to Bath for a lot of this information.
Would he have failed for plagiarism in your class, Ed, if he had?
No, I don't think so. It wasn't like, no, it was just some of the phrases, and I said, no, definitely not. Definitely not.
Okay.
But they're there first, and then Mr. Dowler introduces him to a friend. A charming young man of not much more than 50, dressed in a very bright blue coat with resplendent buttons, black trousers, and the thinnest possible pair of highly polished boots. A gold eyeglass was suspended from his neck by a short, broad black ribbon. A gold snuff box was lightly clasped in his left hand. Gold rings, innumerable, glittered on his fingers, and a large diamond pin set in gold glistened in his shirt frill. He had a gold watch and a gold curb chain with large gold seals, and he carried a pliant ebony cane with a gold top. His linen was of the very whitest, finest, and stiffest, his wig of the glossiest, blackest, and curliest. His snuff was Prince's mixture, his scent Bouquet du Roi. His features were contracted into a perpetual smile, and his teeth were in such perfect order that it was difficult at a small distance to tell the real from the false. Well, Angelo Cyrus Bantam, Esquire, MC of Bath. Go ahead, Kevin. Welcome to Bath. Go ahead, do it. His lines.
Welcome to Bath, sir. This is indeed an acquisition. Most welcome to Bath, sir. It is long, very long, Mr. Pickwick, since you drank the waters. It appears an age, Mr. Pickwick, remarkable. Such were the expressions with which Angelo Cyrus Bantam, Esquire, MC, took Mr. Pickwick's hand.
He is the most ridiculous person you can imagine. And that's, after that description and then that intro dialogue there, he's the height of dandyism, right? And all the gold this, gold that, gold this, gold. I mean, his whole outfit. And then he speaks exactly as you would expect him to speak in this kind of pompous way. He's all show and no depth. Right.
So he's supposed to be modeled on Bo Nash. Is that what we're getting here?
That's a long time before. I mean, Bo Nash is like over 100 years ago. Bo Nash was the most famous of the MCs, the masters of ceremony in Bath. And Bo Nash, I don't think he's the first. I think there's somebody maybe before him. But Nash kind of shapes that role into being the kind of head of society in Bath, does all the introductions, meets everybody, decides who's going to go into the ball or not. So not anybody could show up and associate with some people there. But that's like early 18th century. Nash is born in the 17th century, actually. And, it's in the early 18th century when Bath then becomes kind of, becomes a resort, becomes, they start to restore it in the early 18th century, early to mid 18th century. And then comes this, famous spa that all the rich and the society people like to go to, and it becomes a marriage market too for young women,
which we see a little of here.
Yeah,
right?
we'll definitely see that here. But
did he get paid, Ed? How did he make his money? Like, how do you get compensated as MC?
That's interesting. I don't know. I'm assuming it is I'm assuming it is a paid position, but you also probably would benefit otherwise. But it's not going to be commercial, because then you'd just be then these higher ups wouldn't respect you, right? So it has to be this position where you exist and like you're one of them, like you're born to it, of course.
Otherwise, you have to go to the ball at the Guildhall.
Yeah. And he pretends that he's heard of, oh, Mr. Pickwick, of course I've heard of you. I remember. And like, he's never been there. He's not heard. This is the way I'm sure he greets everybody. That of course I know who you are, because he thinks that he's going to be somebody significant. And Pickwick is worried because he thinks he's heard of him because of the news of his trial has reached Bath. And reports of the trial in those confounded papers. They have heard all about me. That's not the case. It's just because Angelo Cyrus Bantam Esquire MC says that to people because, you know, that's the way he acts. But in reality, Bantam has no idea who he is. But now he's been introduced to the MC, so now Pickwick has to put his name in the guest book, which is at the pump room, which they do, and now he can go to the ball at night, but he has to get the tickets from Bantam. Bantam is in charge of giving the tickets to people. So if you don't know Bantam, you're not going to get a ticket to this ball. Sam, go ahead.
I was going to say, as a name Bantam, he certainly is a strutting rooster, isn't he? A bit.
I hadn't caught that pun. Well done. I hadn't caught that at all. Whenever I see Bantam, I always think bantamweight from boxing, and that's all I ever think of. So, used to be a great bantamweight champ in Philadelphia. Jeff Chandler, was that his name? I can't remember. He was so good. Anyway, there's a weird memory digression, huh? But that's what I think of a bandit. But no, it's the rooster, right? That's, you know, and that's exactly what he is. The strutting rooster. Well, Sam has to go get the tickets for the ball, and he has to go to Bantam's house. Puts on his hat, goes whistling along the street with his hands in his waistcoat pockets. This cavalier Sam doesn't care about anything, will walk down the street with his hands in his pockets, whistling along. It's, you know, it's still a thing that bothers some people even up to today. I've seen this. I can remember in what was it in Death of a Salesman, first time I really encountered it. Arthur Miller's play, where is it Biff tells me he was whistling in an elevator or something at some point, and people are like, what? Like, what are you, a child? And I remember encountering that thinking like, you're not allowed to whistle? I didn't understand that. That's like a, but that has always been a thing that kind of separates you from, you know, proper society. You whistling, that's not something you're allowed to do. Sam's allowed to do it in his class, of course, because he's comfortable with himself and who he is. He's not, as we'll see, as this, you know, this serial part continues, Sam's completely comfortable with who he is through the whole novel, but we really see it demonstrated here that when faced with other servants who were, you know, trying to pretend that they're more important than they are, that they have pretensions to being, you know, of the classes that they serve, Sam's not. I'm sticking my hands in my pockets and whistling down the street is what I'm doing. So, well, he goes to Bantam's and encounters his footman, a powder-headed footman in gorgeous livery and of symmetrical stature. And Sam is unfazed by this snooty footman, right? First, the footman thinks that Sam's like, oh, you know, who are you? And he's like, oh, I have the, you know, here's a card, Pickwick's card for, you know, I have to get the tickets. And then when he comes back, it seems that the powdered footman seems to, and it's John Smalker is his name, we find out later, seems to think that, you know, Sam thinks better of Sam, even though he didn't have a good impression, because Sam is obviously attached to a gentleman, Mr. Pickwick. But Sam is no, you know, he's not going to change. I love what he calls him. He says, no hurry, 6 foot. I've had my dinner. He calls him 6 foot. You died early. I find it gets on better at supper when I does. You know, Sam's always got a great, you know, response to everything. And So they talk a bit. Yes, he offers Sam some snuff. Do you ever do anything in this way, sir? Not without sneezing, replied Sam. It may be done by degrees, sir. Coffee is the best practice. I carried coffee, sir, for a long time. It looks very like rapee, sir. Rapee is a darker leaf snuff. That So what he was
Oh,
doing is apparently because if you snuff coffee, you don't sneeze.
okay. Hardening himself to the effort.
So, but what it is, it's just another way of like he was pretending to take snuff.
Okay.
Why don't you take snuff? But he had to because it wasn't about the taking snuff. He had to take, something that looked like snuff. So because that's what Smoker and these other servants do. They need to look like the people that they serve. Um he says and then there's a little line here that I thought was funny, Kevin. It's he goes back, he takes he has to leave, go back to Mr. Bantam's study. And Dickens has a little line here. By the by, whoever knew a man who never read or wrote either, who hadn't got some small back parlor, which he would call a study? That's from the narrator dropping in there this little joke. And it's a joke about pretensions. It's a joke about, if even people who don't read or write have, oh, that's my study over there. What are you studying? Nothing. So, but again, thematically it works in this part here. This whole entire, two chapters about Bath, 3 chapters about Bath is all about people with pretensions and trying to be
Mm.
something they're not. Or even in an
And
interpolated story later, someone who doesn't want to be who he is in a way. So,
I mean, the small back parlor makes me think of where Dickens actually was writing at the time in 48 Dally Street on the first floor, I guess is the English would say,
well,
but it's just
this
a
hasn't,
small little room in
yeah,
there, where he used to go in there and just pump it out.
he hasn't moved into Doughty when he's writing this. He moves
Okay.
into Doughty at the end. Well, this comes out at the end of March, the last day, well, probably the last weekday of March. I have all kinds of trouble when I'm reading Pickwick stuff and about serials and when they come out and all, because there are lots of people who write about it who do the who talk about each numbered issue as coming out the month after it actually was published. Now I recognize that, like, say the first issue of Pickwick Papers was published on March 31st, 1836. But there are a lot of people who call that the April issue because that's when most
Mm.
people read it. I just have a hard time calling something an April issue when it was published literally in March. I know it's the last day, but it's still published in March. That's why I've done this whole series from March to October, not April to November. But sorry. I was just reading another critic and I just keep getting annoyed that, like, stop it. It's not that month. It's this month. Um, they and the action lines up to the months. So
Right,
like,
right. February's action with the Valentine,
yeah, so it's
published
like,
in February.
yeah, the December issue was published on the last day of December, the last weekday of December, and it's the Christmas issue. I know most people read it in January, but it's still published in December, and the action itself is in December. So, where did I start there? Why did I get off on that tangent?
Talking about a small back parlor, and we took a big detour.
Dickens writing this because he's negotiating to move into Doughty Street in February and no, into March. And I think he moves in the end of March. So
Okay. So
um
he's right on the cusp right
yeah,
now of moving.
he's
Okay.
already negotiating about it.
Mhm.
Actually, I think they might even go into April when he's negotiating, and I can't remember now. So, but it's very soon. He and Catherine are living in these tiny little Furnival Inn, and they've just had a baby. We've got to get out of here. So they're heading off to 48 Doughty Street. And did he have, and that's where that's the museum, right?
That's a museum, and it does still have the little place where he wrote,
Yeah.
and it's not much of a room. I mean, it's very small.
Well, and he wrote and read in his study, so he could call it a study. But Bantam, no. Well, Sam has some parting advice for the for 6 foot. He tells he tells him you're the smoker says, I hope we shall meet you again. And Sam says, you are very obliging, sir. Now don't allow yourself to be fatigued beyond your powers. There's an amiable being. Consider what you owe to society and don't let yourself be injured by too much work. For the sake of your fellow creatures, keep yourself as quiet as you can. Only think what a loss you would be. I love that. Oh, don't work too hard. I mean, that's really what he's saying. Don't work too hard. So that is Sam's advice, and it's good advice. Well, let us right now take a little mid-break here, Kevin, and I want to share some news about the Rosenbach, about not only some new things going on there now, but a new Dickens course as well. But first, let me take this moment to thank all of you for watching this episode. As a nonprofit organization, the Rosenbach Museum and Library depends on the generosity of friends and supporters like you to keep programs like this free and accessible to hundreds of fellow Dickens lovers worldwide. You can donate, if you'd like to donate to the Rosenbach, you can do so at our website. I will put that information in the live chat for people too. And in the, you can also become a member. Membership gives you free museum admission, discounts on programs and courses, and exclusive invitations to member-only events. You can learn more about how to become a member on our website. Rosenbach membership also makes a great gift. You can, but also spring courses and programs are now open for Rosenbach members to register. One of the benefits of membership is you get early access to courses and programs. You get to register first. So next week, at the time we're recording this, next week, Thursday, March 21st, 2024, that's when registration opens to the general public. But right now, members can register for a excuse me, for a course at the Rosenbach. And that is a course, an online Dickens course called David Copperfield Through 21st Century Eyes. It is taught by Juliet Wells from Goucher University. It's 5 Tuesday night sessions in April and May. Dr. Wells taught a course on Emma, on Jane Austen's Emma last year.
Oh, I love that one.
This Copperfield course is 2 classes on David Copperfield by Dickens. Then it's 2 classes on Barbara Kingsolver's Demon Copperhead, which has come out within the last year, and everybody's loving it. It's David
Great book. Did you read it, Ed?
Not yet.
Right.
That in is it modern day Appalachia or is it 20th century? Do you know?
It's modern day during the opioid epidemic.
There you go. Modern day Appalachia. Demon Copperhead. So 2 on Copperfield, 2 on Copperhead, and 1 class on the 2019 film of David Copperfield by Armando Iannucci with Dev Patel as David. So that's going to be a great course.
Do members get a discount, Ed?
Members get a 10% discount, and
right.
they get to register right now to take the course. It's going to be really great. So I'm really looking forward to that, and obviously may have some appeal to our Pickwick viewers as well. We also have an in-person course coming up on Plato's Dialogues. We have another online course that meets on the 5 Wednesdays in May on 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Lots of fun things. Sherlock Mondays is continuing for free still until April 22nd. And then you can now register for this. Members can register for it. Non-members can register for it. We will have a special BiblioVentures show to follow, a special Sherlockian BiblioVenture, which is a subscription-only show on the Hound of the Baskervilles. It will be in Mondays in May and June 2024. After 30 episodes where we covered Sherlock stories, this is now going to be a pay-only series, 8 episodes, same format, myself and my rotating co-hosts to talk about Sherlock. The cost is $80 for this, which works out to $10 a session, $10 a show. That's pretty good. But if you're a member, $50. There's the deal right there. So memberships get a big deal on this. Anybody can register for it. We're taking you to Dartmoor, where a strange, diabolical hound haunts the moors, preying upon the heirs of Baskerville Hall. What will the logically reasoning Sherlock Holmes do when faced with a supernatural creature? You don't want to miss out on Sherlock Monday's Hound of the Baskervilles. I hope you will all come along on that. That's going to be fun, Kevin. You can always write to me at epettit@rosenbach.org, and I may share your questions, comments on this segment called The Corresponding Members of Pickwick Monthly. Just one little tidbit to share this week, because I know we need to save time to talk about manuscript a little later. This also has a bearing on our manuscript discussion, because Henrietta J. wrote about the advertisement that I shared last week on the, do I have a picture? Oh, no, I don't have a picture of it here. I shared an advertisement last week about McNiverin and Cameron Company steel pen nibs. And it was this, Scottish company that made the steel pen nibs. And they have one called the Waverley, one called the Pickwick, one called the Owl. And it was later in the century. It wasn't at the time that Pickwick was written, but it was later in the century. Henrietta J. wrote, I enjoyed the Scottish advert, but their goods would not be used by Dickens. He said he tried metal nibs, but much preferred quill, frequent trimming, cutting included. Problem was the ink, made with oak galls, this black oak gall ink. Ink ate the metal nibs, but did not harm the quill. Henrietta writes, Sam Weller's ink blobs, this is writing as Valentine, ink blobs are probably a result of his writing on flat surface parallel to the floor. The quill does not control the ink flow, thus writers used elevated backs to the writing surface. Most illustrations of clerks and offices show that surface. Dickens's own writing desk was not flat, parallel. It was sloped because the ink flowed too quickly down the perpendicular pen nib, so the quill nib. So thank you, Henrietta, because we had run the last week that Dickens ever at one point start you putting in nibs on his quills. No, apparently he always used the quill pen. So, well, I love to hear from all of you. So if anyone has a question or comment about the serial part for the month, or just Dickens in general, you don't hesitate to drop me a note at epettit@rosenbach.org. All righty. Let's get back to these chapters, Kevin. Where are we at now? Now Sam's leave tells him don't work too hard. Now we get to the assembly rooms. Angelo at precisely 20 minutes before 8 o'clock that night, Angelo Cyrus Bantam Esquire, the master of the ceremonies, emerged from his chariot at the door of the assembly rooms. He was, as master of ceremonies, in strict discharge of the important duties of his all-important office, and planted himself in the room to receive the company. It was it's very crowded, but Dickens doesn't, he doesn't go overboard in making fun of everybody, right? Like you still see that there's elegance going on here. he describes the whole place. Well, it cost you sixpence for the tea. But the dresses rustled, feathers waved, lights shone, jewels sparkled, brilliant eyes lighted up with pleasurable expectation, gleamed from every side. It's actually a beautiful scene here, and he sets it up nicely. But it's also a marriage market. And this is what he sees: the vast number of queer old ladies and decrepit old gentlemen to talk about the talk and scandal of the day. 3 or 4 matchmaking mamas. There'd be a lot more than just 3 or 4 matchmaking mamas there. And the daughters who, remembering the maternal injunction to make the best use of their youth, had already commenced incipient flirtations in the mislaying scarves, putting on gloves and setting down cups and so forth. Slight matters apparently, but which may be turned to surprisingly good account by expert practitioners. And this, of course, is there's the Jane Austen content. What happens in all the Austen novels. Scene of gaiety, glitter, and show, richly dressed people, blah, blah, blah. And Angelo Cyrus Bantam, Esquire, the master of ceremonies, in the midst of all of it. Now we get some introductions and some great Dickensian names, Kevin. The Dowlers are there with Pickwick. Dowler asks, is anybody here? Anybody? The elite of Bath. Mr. Pickwick, do you see the old lady in the gauze turban? The
fat old lady?
inquired Mr. Pickwick innocently. Hush, dear sir. Nobody's fat or old in Bath. That's the Dowager Lady Snuphanuph.
Snuff enough.
That's a great one. And the splendidly dressed young man coming this way?
The one with the long hair and the particularly small forehead?
The same, the richest young man in Bath at this moment, young Lord Mutanhead. A bit obvious, but it's still funny enough to read. Lady Snuphanuph, Lord Mut. And Mr. Pickwick, just gets it right up. That small foreheaded guy. And small forehead means not small.
Not much brains. Right?
So, and then the lordship has this ridiculous, accent with the lisp. Very hot, Bantam. Gracious heavens.
Gracious.
So, it makes me think of Princess Bride, right? Marriage! They, and this lordship has first he rudely stares at Pickwick, right? He says, Lord Mutanhead had been endeavoring to stare Mr. Pickwick out of countenance. When people who he can get away with it, but you're not allowed to stare at somebody, right? Like that's poor etiquette. But of course, as the Lord, he doesn't have to obey the rules. He can stare at people. And he has a instead of a carriage, he has an actual mail cart that he likes to ride around because he thinks this is hilarious that people think it's a real mail cart. I mean, this is just the, Dickens really at home. This is Dickens at, finding the easiest targets right here, they make fun of this guy. Drives a mail cart because he's a lord and people can laugh at him. He can do whatever he wants. But he looks ridiculous, and Dickens is portraying him as ridiculous. And Mr. Pickwick recognizes it too, right? Delightful young man, his lordship, said the master of the ceremonies. So I should think, rejoined Mr. Pickwick dryly. I love how in this novel, Mr. Pickwick, as it started, Kevin, in those first few chapters, he believed everything everybody said to him and was quick writing it down. And Dickens has kind of developed him to this point where he's an honest observer. frequently an honest observer of what's going on, and he recognizes people for what they are. And he gives these little kind of dry answers to that he's not taken in by this lord. Sam doesn't. Sam would be like, oh, I want to talk to you, because Sam loves talking to ridiculous people, but Mr. Pickwick doesn't really want to be involved. Well, he is set up with to play cards, because with Lady Dowager Snuphanuph and two other ladies of an ancient and whist-like appearance. What a great little turn of phrase there. A whist-like appearance, because you're so old you have to play whist. You can't dance anymore. And Pickwick sits down to play cards with them, and there is our first illustration for this novel by Fizz for this issue, for the serial part. And here it is. We got to get down to it. There it is. Let me make that bigger. Whoops. And there they are. The elegant room, you can see, with the chandelier and the ornate mirrors around here. But here's the crowd, and they look not, at least the ones that we're talking to here, the older ladies playing whist. No one looks.
Miss Bolo is looking daggers at Pickwick as he tries to figure out what he's going to play.
Yeah.
And it's just, boy, did he ever get it right there.
He's not very good at this game at all.
He was good enough in Dingley Dell, where everything was happiness.
He's not good with these kind of ladies, though, right? It's Lady Snuphanuph, Mrs. Colonel Wugsby, and Miss Bolo. He's not very good at these. At one point, the Mrs. Colonel Wugsby talks to her daughters. One daughter is like, I've been asked to dance with this youngest Mr. Crawley, and her mom's like, what? Haven't you repeatedly heard that his father has 800 a year, which dies with him? Like, you can't dance with someone who has no money. And then the other daughter's like, oh, I've been going to dance with Lord Mutanhead. She's like, woohoo, good, dance with him. The idea of this marriage market is going on here. But poor Mr. Pickwick, it says in the text, he had never played with three thorough-paced female card players before. They were so desperately sharp that they quite frightened him. And Angelo Cyrus Bantam we have here in the illustration. He's off to the left here. He's talking to the two Mrs. Matinta, who, being single and singular, paid great court to the master of ceremonies in the hope of getting a stray partner now and then.
And look at the two women in the background, kind of looking at the, portrayed more attractively than these two. In the foreground, kind of looking side-eyed, doing an eye roll, like, oh, look at them,
Yeah, Fizz doesn't want to portray these people as very good looking at all, but
they look like the stepsisters in Cinderella up there.
Well, Pickwick is terrible at cards, and this is where the chapter ends. And Miss Bolo rose from the table, considerably agitated, went straight home in a flood of tears and a sedan chair.
I just got to stick this in, the youngest Mr. Crawley. I know Vanity Fair hasn't been published yet, but it makes me think of Pitt Crawley and his younger son.
I don't know if he pulled that name out of this or not. Also Thackeray auditioned to illustrate Pickwick, I think, as we mentioned before, when they were looking for a new illustrator after Seymour died. Thackeray was one of the ones that said, I'd like to do it. And Dickens turned him. He wrote that he brought his work right to Dickens. He visited him at his quarters, and Dickens looked at it and declined, said no. And And Thackeray later had said, like, I'm not surprised. I wasn't that good at it. He's like, I could draw my own stuff for my own books, but I couldn't draw for
Right.
anybody else. He also said, I couldn't draw horses and dogs either. So
Do you know, did he illustrate Vanity Fair
he
himself?
does. That's all his own
Did,
illustrations in Vanity.
there's some great
Yeah.
illustrations in there.
Yeah.
Becky Sharp and so
Yeah.
on is Clytemnestra at the end.
But Thackeray thought later in life, or at least he said that, like, I could do my own works, but I couldn't do anybody else's. I'm not surprised he didn't hire me. So, well, chapter 36, the next chapter. This is where at some point we will have some manuscript pages to look at. The chief features of which will be found to be an authentic version of the legend of Prince Bladud and a most extraordinary calamity that befell Mr. Winkle. We begin with more descriptions of Bath, all about the city. Dickens kind of having fun with the city, the way people, take the waters. But first he says he takes an upper portion. The Dowlers had taken an upper portion in the Royal Crescent, and that's where Pickwick is going to stay. That I'm going to share a picture. That is this. Here's the Royal Crescent as it is today, which looks, without the cars, looks a lot like it did in those days. These beautiful, crescent architecture with these Georgian, single homes here with their big columns in front. This is the Royal Crescent. This is where the more, the well-to-do, the upscale, it's a famous place to live in Bath. But what I didn't realize, Kevin, is like they love their crescents in Bath. There's actually 7 crescents. Which I didn't realize that there's 7 of them, because at first I thought this is where the Royal Crescent, that's where the Elliots in Persuasion stay, in Austen's Persuasion. And then I realized, actually, no, they're in another crescent. And then I realized that then I looked it up and there's actually 7 of these crescents. This is the most prestigious of them, though, from what I know, the Royal Crescent.
He talks about the stairs in the text, but in this picture, it looks as though the street door is level with the pavement. I don't see any stairs.
Here,
and I looked at some other pictures too. I was looking for stairs.
Yeah.
Couldn't find them. I wonder if that's changed over the years.
I don't know. Maybe this was even lower here and there were stairs that went up to the door. I'm not sure. That's interesting. I hadn't noticed that. Let me, where's that in the text?
Where it says Mr. Winkle felt himself irresistibly impelled onto the steps and the door blew to.
Well, that's later. Yeah. So
we'll
look at that picture later, actually, and we'll think about this. But yeah, we'll hit that later. But Mr. Pickwick is drinking the waters of Bath. He began to drink the waters with the utmost assiduity. He drank a quarter of a pint before breakfast, then walked up a hill, another quarter of a pint after breakfast, and then walked down a hill. And after every fresh quarter, he declared, and I feel better. And his friends like, yeah, but there was nothing wrong with you to begin with. So better from what? And this is Bath. And then the great pump room, where there's a statue of Nash. It says that's Beau Nash, who was the, master of ceremonies that Bantam is now. This is people go to, get cured of whatever ails them. It's a spa town. It's just by and it's true that those waters, those hot springs, it's relaxing. I'm sure it helps soothe, but you're not going to be, cured of diseases by drinking that water. I'm not even sure if it's even healthier. Do you know, Kevin, is really drinking that stuff healthy?
I have no idea if there's any medical foundation or evidence.
I wouldn't trust it. So,
although we do hear that it cleared Prince, as I say, Bladud from leprosy. So there's that, but only anecdotally.
And that's the legend of founding the city too, of course. So that Dickens has decided needs an update. He needs to rewrite that legend. Well, that's going to happen soon because he's in the uh, at home, and he's going to stay up late and read. The servant says that Mr. Dower is going to stay up and wait for his wife, Mrs. Dower, who's out, partying, having a good time, but he's inside. We get the idea that she's much younger than him, and still wants to go out and socialize, and he wants to sit home and fall asleep. And Mr. Pickwick finds a couple sheets of writing paper, pretty closely written over, in the inkstand drawer, and they were folded so that the title, which was in a good round hand, was fully disclosed to him. And it is the true legend of Prince Bladud. And it starts off like a little fairy tale. It's the less than 200 years ago, on one of the public baths in the city, there appeared an inscription in honor of its mighty founder, the renowned Prince Bladud. The inscription is now erased. I don't know what Dickens means by that. I don't know. I couldn't find references to that. Maybe that's something he pulled out of the guidebook.
Okay.
That it said that. But first, I just want to comment on how what I mentioned earlier, Kevin, that from serial numbers 2 through 6, they all had an interpolated tale. They all had a character saying, "Let me tell you a story," or somebody reading a story. And this is the first time since 6. Now we're at issue 13. So we've gone 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So we've gone 6 issues with no extra tales. I think, Dickens hasn't needed them anymore. It's the plot, like he's been chugging along. He's got a connected story. He's got characters that are doing things and things that relate. He hasn't been able to stop and just say, let's tell a story. And of course, now that we've had that trial, so we've kind of a high moment. It's not quite a climax, but it's a high moment. We're just going to go to Bath, and while we're there, we're going to have a story there too. None of it really is driving anything forward. Although I do think it's thematically related in that all these bath scenes we're constantly seeing how people are trying to change who they are, act more important than they actually are. We'll get the servants in the next chapter doing this. And this is a story about a prince who wants to kind of not quite do what he's supposed to do, right? And he leaves his class in a sense, to be a wanderer. So it's in a way thematically connected, kind of.
It's marriage. It's got some marriage in there.
And there's actually, but what did exist in Bath at the time that Dickens he probably didn't say it himself, but which was a little bit famous, is there is a statue of Bladud there. And here it is, and it's kind of funny looking, with his mustache and wide eyes. This statue is there. And
it says 1982 there at the top.
Don't know what that is.
Okay.
Maybe that was maybe it's been restored at some point. There is a plaque there too, and it's here. This is where it is in this niche here.
Okay.
There's a plaque under it about Bladud kind of founding by legend, founding the city. But that's been there for a very long time. And I think that statue, we think, goes back to, I don't know when, because I thought I did, but I don't. But yeah, there's the statue there. And Dickens, though, and it is, this is the legendary founding of, the Bath, that he is the guy that found it. The pig bathed in the, in the mud and it was cured. I didn't come across anything with him being afflicted with leprosy, though. So I don't know where that comes into the legend. And the beginning of this is the legend is he's got leprosy. he's hanging out with these pigs. He notices the pigs are healthy in the mud. He puts the mud on. He's cured of leprosy, but the pig dies. And I think that pig dying is Dickens added that too. I don't know if that's in any of these legends. It just seems like a funny thing to add at the end. I know he's dying. Maybe that's not funny, but
And
he had
then they all had
imprudently taken a
boiled
bath
ham.
at too high a temperature. He had imprudently taken a bath at too high a temperature. Yes. So that would have been good to end with that line. And in the end, they all had some boiled ham.
Right.
But then Dickens is turning all this around. Says, this was the legend. Listen to the true one. I had the only thing I've ever read about Bladud that I have is also it's in Geoffrey of Monmouth's History of the Kings of Britain. Written 11th century, 12th century, I can't even remember. Sorry, medievalists out there, I don't remember. But it's the King Arthur is part of that, but it's also this long list of legendary kings of Britain, and Bladud is in that. It's like a page, less than a page. It's a chronicle history, so you don't get that much in it for some of them. He is the father of another king. Do you know what famous king Bladud is the father of?
I'm going to go with King Lear.
He is the father of King Lear.
And I only guess that
Yeah.
because he says every inch a king.
Yeah. He is the father of King Lear, and then the King Lear story, some of the stuff that Shakespeare uses are in that story, but that's more elsewhere that Shakespeare gets his info about King Lear. Yeah, I don't know where this leprosy comes from. That's not in Geoffrey. The pigs aren't in Geoffrey of Monmouth either. So those are obviously things from later legends and added to this, legend of this ancient king.
And then just back to Lear for a second, he also mentions putting his eyes out of the other king. So like you've got every inch a king putting the eyes out
Yeah.
vile jelly. It's almost as if there's a war between Shakespeare and fairy tales in this.
Well, all that stuff could have been in
trying to
Dickens'
come out.
head, sure. He
Mhm.
doesn't mention in this story that Bladud is Lear's son, Lear's Bladud's son, but Dickens then maybe knows that, so that stuff kind of just creeps in without him realizing that he's creeping in those that he's putting in those references. They but this whole this now the story turns, and it's like Dickens is deciding, I'm going to write my own British legend. And it reads very much like a folk tale of the 19th century, or a fairy tale, like something that the Grimms were putting together. A great many centuries since, there flourished a great state, and Lord Hudibras, king of Britain, and he had a son who wanted to marry some girl, and then he can't marry her. And Dickens throws some old King Cole lines in there and gets to pretend that, like, yay, they're not, ignorance and tradition through the ignorance of traditionary historians, these lines have been attributed to King Cole, the calling for his pipe and calling for his pot and calling for his fiddler's three. I love this, Kevin. This, like, Dickens, and it's also this antiquarian stuff that he's also made fun of earlier with the stone that Mr. Pickwick discovers. This is an age where people are discovering these connections and ancient texts and historical, reasons why things come about. So it's more Dickens also playing with those antiquarian pursuits that are going on in the 19th century. And in his story, there is that Bladud is in love with someone else. None of that stuff happened, like in the legend that he gave the first. Like, none of that stuff happened. Actually, Bladud had fallen in love with someone. The king is angry. Bladud's imprisoned. He escapes. He escapes by considerately killing his jailer, because if he let him live, he would have been punished for letting him escape. So, I'll kill you. You're welcome. And then he discovers his love has married, and then he weeps, and his hot tears form. But he prays to the gods, like, oh, open the earth and take me now. And they do, because the gods oblige you. And then but his hot tears form the baths. and that's his and that's the Legend of Prince Bladud. Well, we're going to now look at manuscript pages, because within this story, starting at where it says, it's right after the King Cole reference and those two lines,
which is an obvious injustice to the memory of King Lud.
Yep. And then shortly after that, a few sentences in, it says, this was no other than Prince Bladud himself, in honor of whose happiness a whole people were at that very moment straining alike their throats and purse strings. That is where the beginning of the manuscript pages we have at the Rosenbach for this book. And it is, where is it? Here it is. Only 44 leaves of manuscript, probably of around 1,500 pages it would have taken. I mean, in the way that these are, about 1,500 pages would have been Dickens' entire manuscript, of his manuscript pages for this novel. Only 44 left. And the Rosenbach has 27 of them. Other pages are in the British Library, the New York Public Library, the Free Library of Philadelphia, and the Dickens House in London has one page. They are, I have this article here that I meant to have open already. That says, of the 44 leaves strewn to the wind. This is an article from the Dickensian written in 1932, Kevin. And it says, of the, and they mention how Dr. Rosenbach has purchased some of these and has some of them in his A.S.W. Rosenbach, the famous bookseller of Philadelphia and New York. Still own them at the close of the year 1931, and he owned them when he died, and now they're in our collection. But then it ends with, of the 44 leaves strewn to the winds nearly 100 years ago, whose vicissitudes we have endeavored to retrace, 6 repose in the British Museum, and 38 are treasured by private owners, well aware of their own value. The history of these survivors furnishes us with the belief that more pages of the Pickwick Papers in their original manuscript dress will yet come to light. And we feel sure of echoing the, well, whatever. But that idea that, like, we found this many, surely we'll find more. Well, 90 years later, guess what? There's still only 44. There's probably only going to be 44. These pages were just destroyed. They were set into type and then thrown in the waste paper basket. What then they took to Dickens is then they took the proofs of the printing and he corrected them. And sometimes that stuff has, most of that early stuff has gone away too. Sometimes they survive. I think one of the novels, some of the later novels, they have all the proofs as well that Dickens corrected.
So it was Charles Hicks, the head printer at Bradbury and Evans.
Bradbury and Evans.
So he was out in front of Dickens himself, who always seemed to have an idea of how posterity would see him and of his legacy from the very beginning. But was it this guy Hicks, Ed, that first had the idea, gee, you know, there's value here. Somebody might want to see these, and started to save them himself?
Hicks had saved some, and then, but I don't know if we know why he like, maybe he accidentally saved them. Maybe he just stuck them in somewhere. Then they wound up, and later he realized, oh, look, here's some papers that weren't thrown away. And then he dispersed some of them. One of the manuscript leaves we know actually was sold at one point by John Dickens, by Dickens's father. So he managed to get some copies. I wonder if Dickens's father didn't go to Hicks and say, hey, do you have some of those manuscript pages?
Oh, okay.
He had one at one point, and then he sold it later. So, but these weren't considered worth saving. Dickens didn't bother to save any of the early ones through Nicholas Nickleby. And then it was starting with Old Curiosity Shop after he becomes friends with John Forster, actually right around the writing of this now. And then Forster, and then Dickens doesn't start saving them until his manuscripts until Old Curiosity Shop. And then when he dies, he bequeaths them all to Forster, and Forster gives them to the what becomes the Victoria and Albert Museum. But Dickens doesn't start saving them until Old Curiosity Shop himself. He just, once he's given them to the printers, he doesn't bother with it. So let me share some of these pages here. Here we go. You'll see it's numbered up top here, 50, and this is the number for these manuscript pages that are going on. I don't know it's not like, I don't know if is there 49? Yeah, so this is numbered just for this serial part, okay? Because this serial part would have been about 95 pages, granting on what we have here. If 22 pages of this manuscript equates to about 7 pages in the serial, you work that out, it's about 90 pages, 95 pages would be the entire thing. So it starts on page 50. That's this, and it's this was no other than Prince Bladud himself, in honor of whose happiness, we just read this, and now I should know it right off the top of my head. Happiness, a whole people were at that very moment straining
alike their throats and purse strings.
So we see all the little corrections that Dickens makes all through this. Sometimes they're, he's taking out whole phrases, and then sometimes you'll see them, he writes them in. Here he's taken out a whole sentence. Here when Bladud tells the old king, at first he had written, the old gentleman received the communication, and then he crosses it out right away. And it's the king flew into a frightful rage. I mean, he just right into it. There's a mark here that says 387. It's just written here, and it doesn't seem to be Dickens's hand. This is probably one of the printers, one of the typesetters, the compositors had written at this in here. It's odd though, because it's not like this is the beginning of page 387 right here. It's not. It's like this just falls on 387. And later I see there's some other numbers in here that it's just some general guide perhaps that they were doing.
Maybe word count for the compositor, maybe, or some type of.
It would be odd because this is page 387 in the serial. Because remember, the serial is sequentially numbered. So here's 387. This stuff is occurring on page 387, but that's not the start or end of it where he's written it. That's why I just think it's odd where it's placed there.
Ed, can you go to the very bottom and
sure,
highlight a little bit where he wrote at the bottom line? See where he put his correction in? There is the evidence that Dickens is capable of writing legibly. So when he had a little small area, right, and he really wanted to make sure that the proofer got it right, he was capable of writing neatly.
Not happened to, same. His handwriting definitely gets sloppier as he goes on in life. You read some of his later manuscripts, or you try to read some of his later manuscripts, and his letters, they're really difficult. But it's not just the penmanship itself. It's that there's a lot of space. He's writing larger when he's younger and using more space here, not cramming it together. Later, his manuscripts are more densely packed and he writes smaller. But early on in his career, he was not doing that. He liked to write with this, well, as we mentioned, he does like to use a goose quill pen. He didn't like to use nibs. When you use a quill pen, of course, the pen would have to be mended over time. It gets dull, and you have to get a little pen knife out and make it sharp, put it the right kind of level, the angle that you like it at. but you give it a little point. And Dickens used black iron gall ink early in his career, but later, you'll see in later manuscripts too, he switches to blue ink, and he switches it in his letters, many of his letters too. He also used this cream-colored paper early in his career, and later he has a paper that's kind of blue tint to it. Must have been a visual thing. Must have been easier for him to read writing on these things than the later on when he switches paper and ink as well. Even the I think the Oliver Twist manuscript, of which pages exist, are denser than this. So 22 to 28 lines of page to a page here. Most often it's 24 to 25 lines. Sometimes he'll write on the back. Sometimes he's started a page, and I have one of those later here, and there it is. And he has started writing something here, and then he's just crossed it out and said, no. And he's just flipped the page over and started it again. So actually it would be right here. So he's flipped it over and just restarted where he had left off. There's a moment here in this with the knocking at the door. And you know this, Kevin, I've talked about this, and I talk about this when I show this manuscript at the Rosenbach. That kind of gives us a little glimpse into Dickens at the moment composing his text. And this is when Mrs. Dowler has returned home, and they're knocking at the door to get in, and they finally wake Winkle up, and he comes down. And here it is the moment where their final knocks. There were 3 and 30 knocks. I can't remember what's crossed out here. I can't read it off the top of my head. But right down here, we get more knocking. And the knocking is rap, 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 rap. And then we see something crossed out here. And then rah, 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 rap went the knocker. And what's happened is Dickens has started to write this rap, 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 rap. And he wrote again, rap, 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 rap. And then decided that that's not the sound he was hearing and changes it to that rah, 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 rap. What we do know about Dickens composing is that we have these stories from one of his children and other people. Times he would get up and make faces in the mirror and then quick run over and start writing down what he had seen. He would say things out loud, especially dialogue, and especially if they were accents. He loved to do the voices out loud. So he was imagining this stuff happening, hearing it, seeing it as he's writing. And I think just a tiny little thing like this in a manuscript shows, what he hears, and he starts writing it, rap, 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 rap. And then he hears, no, that's not the sound I hear for the final knock. What I heard was rah, 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 rap. So he changes it right away and does that. But I just think it's illustrative of how he is hearing as he's writing and has to make the correction so he gets it right. And so this begins with where I had started with Prince Bladud being introduced. At the top of some of these pages, see up top here in the top left corner, we have someone's name. It looks like Turner, perhaps. And I have another one here, Wallace, right in the middle here. And I have another one right here. Looks like Lloyd right here. Very fancy script for this Lloyd, too. And even got a big flourish. I'm pretty sure these are compositors who are signing off on their work. And perhaps this is where Lloyd even has to take, like, this is where he's taking over from, or this is just the first page. And look, he's just found the first, like, instead of here, he's written it here because they write it on the left side. and it's the first space. Well, I guess he could have written it at the top. But these are the compositors, because all the work would have been divided up. Would have taken, oh, I forget the exact number. I'm trying to remember how many pages they could set into type during a particular day. And it is but I have these notes here somewhere. They could put in so if the serial part is 32 pages and the manuscript is about 90 pages, the compositors, a well-trained compositor could set about 2,000 letters per hour. Letters. Number 13 contains 88,500 characters. That's letters plus punctuation plus spaces in between, because a space is also a little text, little metal block that you have to put in
Gotta
there.
put one in, right?
88,500. So 2,000 letters an hour. I think it's like 44 hours of work just to set the type for that. And then of course there's the Pickwick advertiser that they have to do all the work for in the front of it as well, and in the back of it. But at least for the text itself, about 44 hours. They had many, I don't know how many, but they had several compositors who would take this and they would divide it up, and they would all set their own pages. And but this is the text that they had to read. And it's actually not that difficult. It's you wind up being a little tough here at times. This was just, look at the bottom here. This was just Mr. Dower's opinion as he sat before the fire and felt something, and felt his something of, it's like you hit a word here every now and then, but I'm thinking, but as you are going through this and are used to seeing his handwriting, you would get the hang of it after.
Honestly indignant.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, because it's HO, and then it's the equal sign is what they used to do for the
felt
continuing. Honestly
indignant with
indignant.
all the inhuman people at the party who were keeping him up.
So, it's not that hard to read early on. It's just later that Dickens's, manuscripts become really difficult to read. And this one goes right to the end of the chapter, and I'll share that. These blank pages here, which is a little bit written here. Again, this was, he had started it and then scribbled it out and then just tried to turn the page over because he's only written a few lines on it. And as we get to the end of this chapter, this is how he always ends them. Dickens would do this flourish on the final page of any chapter. This is what he, scribbled this down here. I'm sorry, not chapter, of any serial part. He put this little flourish here. I'm done. That's it.
It's like Lawrence Stern, except it didn't make it in.
Yeah. And there's a little, there's a few word changes throughout this manuscript, but not a ton of them. Little phrase, like there's a phrase at one point in Prince Bladud says he is on the green turf. He lays down on the green, I think it's the yielding turf. Where is that? Right here. Dickens has put in Prince Bladud sank upon the green, and then he had started to scribble it out here, it looks like, and then he put yielding turf, And the text reads, what, Kevin? Green turf, doesn't it?
I have, yeah, the prince sank upon the green turf, comma, and bathed his swollen feet in his tears.
But here
So
he had
yielding
written
didn't make it.
yielding, and it didn't make it in. So whether he didn't catch that when he read the proofs or not, but as whoever was reading this saw the green yielding, or maybe Dickens read, maybe he did put yielding in there, and Dickens then tossed it out once he looked at the proofs. We don't know. We don't have the proofs, but there's little things like that through here that you can find, little tiny word changes, but nothing, nothing earth-shattering. We're not finding like whole passages were cut out in this manuscript. And that's because, as I'm sure, he's writing for a deadline. Oh my gosh, I got to finish 32 pages and it's due by the end of this week so they can put it in type and get it out next week. Like he's always
And get me back a fair copy too,
yeah.
right? So
And
that,
even that, like literally they're running over. They have a boy that works there, one of their, messengers, or does all kinds of things. And they give him the proofs and he runs them over to sometimes they're like chapter by chapter, run these over, and he runs this chapter over, and runs the next chapter over, maybe a little bit later. And Dickens has to read it, make any kind of connections, any kind of mistakes that he sees, and sends them back. Before they're even sent to him, though, they are proofed. Like they print them. They're on really cheap paper, and they're proofreaders, readers that they call them, and the readers will read it and make any corrections they need. Then it's run off to Dickens, and then it's got to come back. I mean, sometimes they could be up. They could be up all night if they're up to the deadline. Because then they've got to print it, and then it's got to dry. The pages have to dry, and drying them takes about 12 hours, and then they have to be pressed in hydraulic press. And then they've got to send to be stitched and bound. I mean, there's time that has to happen after. It's not like if Dickens proofs it, then they're like, all right, it'll be out in the street tomorrow. Oh, no. There's still a process that has to happen. And Dickens is constantly writing up to deadline. So we know a few times he overwrites certain parts that happened early on, and then he has to cut them, and he has to cut certain sections off and move them into the next serial part. He's sometimes discovered that he underwrites, but that doesn't happen that often. People will constantly say like, oh, that's where all the interpolated tales are, is that, oh, he's gotta fill up the issue. He never had to fill up. He's got enough words.
yes. The problem is holding himself back.
Yeah. So it's great to be able to have these manuscript pages, and we will share again. I'll share some more next week, but we're already going really long today. So let's finish these couple chapters. The end of this chapter is
36 is the Winkle and Mrs. Dower affair.
After he reads the story, then Mrs. Dower finally shows up back at the house, but Dowler's already fallen asleep, so he can't let her in. They're trying to ring the door, knock on the door. They've got to ring the bell. She's like, the bell doesn't work. And this is when we get another illustration from Fizz, which I will share here. And Mr. Winkle wakes up, and he's the one that comes out to let them in. But the wind is blowing so hard that the door slams behind him. He's stuck out here in his, dressing gown, which looks more like a woman's dressing gown, wrapped around him. And the porters are laughing, and he jumps into the coach, or into the sedan chair with her. And here's Mr. Dower out the window here with his mutton chops, thinking that because Mrs. Craddock has told him, "Mom, your wife, someone's running away with her." That's what he thinks is going on here. This moment of ridiculousness that happens. There is actually, excuse me, Kevin, many of Fizz's original drawings exist, and the original drawing for this actually exists. And here is a little piece of it. It's cut off the top. This is at
Mhm.
that Yale at the Beneke Rare Books Library at
Oh,
Yale
yes.
University.
Oh, yeah.
And they have this on their website, and here, so this is just a little piece of it, but this is the original drawing, and it's a little different. You notice he's not holding the candle up here, and Dickens
Mm.
had actually written a little instructions on it. And here's the two of them back side by side. And notice they're reversed because the drawing then is engraved, so everything is up. And then he engraves this, and then when they take the engraving, it's everything is the other way around. Um, but Dickens had written some instructions for Fizz after looking at this drawing, and he wrote, Winkle should be holding the candlestick above his head, I think. It looks more comical, the light having gone out. And he does make that change. He's holding the candle here, and Dickens tells him to put it up here, that it'll look more comical. So he makes that change. And then Dickens also wrote, a fat chairman, so short as our friend here, never drew breath in Bath. But it's just like he's just like Dickens is making a funny comment to Fizz. I don't he's not telling him to change the fat chairman, but that was Dickens's comment on seeing this fat chairman. Um, and he says, I would leave him where he is, decidedly. So maybe they had a conversation about this. Like, should he be so fat? And then Dickens wrote, is the lady fully dressed? She ought to be. Now, I can't quite tell here. This isn't the clearest picture. Or the most detailed, image here. She looks dressed here to me. And in this, she actually has more neck here. So I don't know what the difference here. I don't know what Dickens was quite asking her about here. Is she fully dressed? I don't know what he was seeing in this drawing that made it seem not that. But uh, not much change here except the candle. He adjusts the candle. Fizz does for the final engraving. Interesting to have that still exists, some of those drawings. I don't think we have no Fizz drawings at the Rosenbach. Let me stop that share. We have no Fizz drawings at the Rosenbach. But we do have well, we do have manuscript pages. We have a lot of Crookshank drawings, actually. But I don't know if we have any of the original Crookshanks for Oliver Twist. I know we have a lot of prints of them, but I'm not sure we have any of the actual original drawings. All righty. Well, so Winkle, escapes, this high moment of, humor here. He escapes and runs off, and the chapter ends, where was Sam during all of this? Where Mr. Weller was all this time. We will state where he was in the next chapter. And this will finish up with today the chapter 37 honorably accounts for Mr. Weller's absence by describing a soiree in the title here, spelled the way it should be spelled, Soiree, to which he was invited and went. Also relates how he was entrusted by Mr. Pickwick with a private mission of delicacy and importance. Sam gets a letter. We'll have to go through this a little quickly, Kevin. He gets a letter from Smalker inviting him to a soiree. Um, uh, and it's
Sealed in bronze wax with a door key.
yeah,
Oh,
that's
a door
he
key.
uses a
I love
door
that. He's a
key.
doorman. So
He
what's
uses a
his
door
deal?
key for his
Okay.
seal. So, and
Yep.
again, though, it's a way of Smocker aping the class that he's serving. Like, oh, they have a fancy seal. Here's my seal. It's just the door key. And it invites him to consisting of a friendly soiree consisting of a boiled leg of mutton with the usual trimmings. The soiree to be on table at 9:30 punctually. So Sam's like, I never heard of a boiled leg of mutton called a soiree before. I wonder what they'd call a roast one. Um, and the spelling here of soiree by Smocker, it's him late. He doesn't he can think that he's of a class, but he doesn't even know how to spell. Not that some of the some of his, the people he's serving might not have known how to spell well either. Um, but even the letter is directed to, it says airy bell as an instruction to the bearer. I couldn't figure that out. I had that in my notes here, my from the Mark Wormold notes in my Penguin edition, and he has that meaning airy bell. The note instructs the bearer of the letter to ring the bell in the area outside the kitchen below street level. This is the bell that communicates with the servants' quarter. That's the airy bell. Area bell is what it should have been, but he just writes airy bell because that's what it sounds like. Smoker has most of the abilities of a proper gentleman, but he still has spelling issues, and he's still obviously trying to, ape his betters. So, as they would have put it. Well, Sam meets up with him, and Sam's going to show him that what? You don't need to ape any betters, just be yourself, right?
So he's got a powdered head. Is it his own hair, or is he wearing a wig?
That would be a wig. That would most likely be a wig.
Would the wig look anything like this, Ed?
Not as wild. I think a little more contained.
You mind if I don this
No,
just to
go
try
for
to
it.
bring a little atmosphere? It's
Yeah.
not powdered.
Well, it doesn't need to be powdered now. Back in the day, you needed to powder them. So
Well, there you go.
keep them nicer and fresher. But there you go. So, all righty. Well, 6 foot. As their he has a copper timepiece. He pulls out his watch. It's copper. It's not gold.
Not silver. Can't afford silver.
It even has a black string with a copper key at the other end instead of like a normal nice ornament for a fob and a chain. He's got a black string. So, but he's got these items and he likes to show them off. Like, look, I'm the gentleman here with this. Well, they go to have their soiree and they meet the other servants and at a small greengrocer's shop. That's where they have their party. And Sam just thinks this is all funny. And then they also kind of lord it over the greengrocer, kind of just as would happen to them, right?
Right.
They're have you got your gloves on? Take the kiver off. That's the cover. And they call him, you're a vulgar beast. And then it says, the poor greengrocer bowed very humbly while these little epithets were bestowed upon him in the true spirit of the very smallest tyranny. And when everybody had said something to show his superiority. It's just like they behave like the people they serve behave probably. So, they lord it over the greengrocer just like they're lorded over by their masters. Tuckle, no, not Tuckle. It's the man in the blue suit arrives and will get he arrives late. Sam likes him because he seems so pretentious in his speech. And then we get a Wellerism, which is your health.
Oh, I got it here, Ed.
God.
He says, so I'm afraid you're a cunning fellow, Mr. Weller, said that individual. No, said Sam. I leave all that here to you. It's a great deal more in your way than mine, as the gentleman on the right side of the garden wall said to the man on the wrong un, when the mad bull was a coming up the lane. It was more in the other guy's way than his. The mad bull.
The wonderful thing about Wellerisms is you frequently have to take a moment afterwards to figure like, wait, what? How does and then once you work it out, you're like, oh my gosh, that's perfect. And that seems to be the way everybody reacts to Sam. That people have to like, what? And then they think about it and and he's just like, everything's fine. And they don't call him on these things. Somebody asked a question, what does a kilobite taste? That's was mentioned earlier when Smocker was asking Sam if he takes the waters, and Sam says no, he didn't like the taste of them, and he says that's the uh Calibate, and he spells it Killibeate, and that's actually from the Calibate, ChalYbeate, which are the iron salts in the water. That's actually what makes these springs, valuable, is that they have this salt in them, and they're hot, obviously. But it's another way of Dickens providing this alternate spelling for a character who doesn't understand the words that he's really saying. He knows what it is. He knows how to sound it out, but he doesn't know the proper way to spell it. They're all going to break up their party. Well, they order drinks first. They order a shrub, and some of them order gin. And Sam, though, orders punch, which was what Dickens would have ordered, which is what, Mr. Pickwick would have ordered. He's like, bring a bowl of punch out. The toasts begin. Very common 18th, 19th century toasts. You toast everybody in the room, and you could go on for 20 toasts, and everybody gets hammered because you're toasting. They find out Whiffers has resigned his post. Oh my gosh, so you're no longer going to be, a gentleman's servant. And it was because of the young, it was because partly they had required him to eat cold meat. And the pretensions of the servants now wind up being like worse than the behavior of those they're serving, in a sense. Loud cries of shame. You make eat cold meat. Who's the snob here? He has a distinct recollection of once being consented to eat salt butter. So the hardships of these servants. Well, the party's going to break up, and Sam's like, what? Leave 3/4 of a bowl of punch behind you? Nonsense. Sit down again. And then Sam orders oysters, and the party goes on. And I like this, that Sam's showing these guys, you guys got to relax. This is how you have a soiree, okay? With oysters and a big bowl of punch, and this is the fun you're supposed to have. And they all get drunk, and Sam leaves Mr. Tuckle lying on the curbstone outside, and as they all go home. Well, Mr. Pickwick, when Sam arrives, tells him that Winkle has disappeared, and Sam has to go find him. It's interesting that they both recognize that Dowler's a blowhard here, right? Sam says, it wouldn't take much to settle that here, Dowler, sir. And Pickwick says, well, Sam, I may have my doubts of his great bravery and determination also. That Pickwick realizes that, like, Dowler's not going to skin anybody. He's not going to cut Winkle's throat. That's just the way he talks. But they have to go get Winkle. Sam, you have to go get him. He must be made, Sam. And found and brought back to me. Sam finds out in no time at all. In 2 hours' time, Sam puts out some, feelers, and he finds out that somebody with Winkle's description went from the Royal Branch Hotel over to Bristol. And Mr. Pickwick says, if he attempts to run away from you, knock him down or lock him up. You have my full authority, Sam. And then just as Sam's leaving, we'll read the end of this here, Kevin. Sam comes back in, and he says, you read Sam, I'll read Pickwick. Sir,
whispered Sam.
Well, Sam, said Mr. Pickwick.
I fully understand my instructions, do I, sir?
I hope so.
It's regularly understood about the knocking down, is it, sir?
Perfectly, thoroughly. Do what you think necessary. You have my orders. Sam
gave a nod of intelligence and, withdrawing his head from the door, set forth on his pilgrimage with a light heart.
With a light heart. because he's going to get to knock down Mr. Winkle. Sam wants
But what authority? Like,
Sam
all of a sudden we're
loves
back in, like,
roughing it up.
Pickwick's Lord of the Manor, it's almost like we're in medieval days where, the Lord says to his servant, go out and do it. You have my authority. What
Yeah.
authority? We're in England here. An Englishman is protected by the law, but
Well,
not here.
it's close to April Fool's Day where you kind of do that reversal of, societal, roles. So Sam gets to go knock down a gentleman if required, and we know Sam's going to want to require it. So, well, we'll see what happens when we get there next month. Pickwickians, thank you for joining us for number 13 of Pickwick Monthly. Kevin, thank you in your
Thank you, Ed.
powdered wig. Coming up next month, Courtney Krawchak will return to discuss number 14, chapters 38 to 40, in which Mr. Winkle steps out the frying pan and walks gently and comfortably into the fire. Sam is entrusted with a mission of love, and Mr. Pickwick is introduced to a new scene in the great drama of life. A very exciting part next month, Kevin. I will also share even more manuscript pages of Pickwick from the Rosenbach's collection. We have some from one of the chapters from next month's part, and I'll talk a little more, give a little more background on how Rosenbach acquired them, and some more information about the printing and the writing of these manuscripts in general. I didn't want to tell everything today, especially because I knew we were going to run long, which we did. So, all right. Again, let me remind you to subscribe to our channel, to like these videos if you haven't done so already. You can support the Rosenbach through donation. Your support helps us create more programs like this and also care for our collections. You could also become a member. Membership gives you early access to and discounts to courses and programs. You can find out more at our website. I told you right now, if you're watching this live or watching it close to live, there is a Copperfield course that you can sign up for at the Rosenbach, which is online. And also the Sherlock Mondays Hound of the Baskervilles, which will happen as an 8-part show that will happen in May and June of 2024. I am Kevin. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Always a pleasure.
Always fun talking to you. I'm Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach Museum and Library. I'll see you all next month for number 14 of the Pickwick Papers. Don't allow yourself to be fatigued beyond your powers. Consider what you owe to society, and don't let yourself be injured by too much work. It's good advice. All righty. Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.